NightMare, the very first antagonist in Kirby besides Dedede, one of the most iconic ones of all time, the main villain of the anime, and considering the world of Kirby is called Dreamland, you'd think he'd be a pretty significant character. But he's not, at least not explicitly. In Kirby's Adventure / Nightmare in Dreamland, NightMare just showed up in the Fountain of Dreams and tried to give people nightmares. Dedede sealed him into the Fountain of Dreams' water and took the Star Rod and broke it to hide it from him, because it's NightMare's only weakness and controls the fountain. Kirby assembles the Star Rod and NightMare emerges, but in a form called the NightMare Power Orb. I've never understood the NightMare Power Orb. It's not an item he uses like the name implies, it's him in a weaker form. But it's more of a power limiter or a shield than anything. But it seems to be an obligation for every Kirby villain to have a form that's just a ball. NightMare gets defeated, and I just had to show this death sprite. That's really all we had going for NightMare for a while. Outside of the anime, of course, which 90% of people will say is not canon and disregard. If you know me, though, I'm very against this notion. NightMare's lore, and right back at you, is that he is a wizard that can create life, and owns an entire galaxy-sized corporation known as NightMare Enterprises, NME for short, also sometimes called Holy Nightmare. He would attempt to play God, creating monsters that can do various tasks and selling them to people who want them. But during this, one monster he created turned on him. Click this card to see who that was. And NightMare was furious. Slowly but surely, a resistance group against NightMare formed called the Star Warriors, they are not a species, and attempted to stop him. But with the ability to create infinite monsters and stealing wildlife, he quickly decimated them. Only 9 known Star Warriors survived. King Dedede does some kind of deal with the NME salesman and gets a teleporter installed into his castle. Kirby blows into Dreamland as predicted by Kaboo, who was told the prophecy by Meta Knight. NightMare works behind the scenes, manipulating Dedede's order to benefit them in stopping Kirby. After NightMare blows up Cappy Town, Meta Knight assembles an army and infiltrates NightMare's headquarters. When everyone finally reaches NightMare, he traps Kirby in his own dream, which ends up being NightMare's downfall as Kirby quickly takes back control of his mind and conjures the Star Rod, the only thing that can defeat NightMare. A lot of people use this scene as evidence that Kirby Right Back Atcha is not canon, since the Star Rod is said to be created by the Ancients, when Kirby creates it from eating the Warp Star. But this proves nothing since it happened in a dream. Kirby doesn't have the Star Rod upon exiting the dream, so that never happened. The only requirement is that Kirby must have seen the Star Rod before, which is entirely possible since Kirby has drifted through space for ages, and Superstar implies there is a dream fountain on many planets. In the Japanese version, NightMare proceeds to drop the hardest line ever, but thanks to APAB copyright purge, I don't have the original footage to show. True to my name, I am but a dream that lives in your heart, therefore I am immortal. For as long as there is fear in your heart, I will someday return. Basically confirming that he is literally a nightmare. That's pretty much it, other than a few cameos in Parallel Nightmare and Super Kirby Clash, who is technically a different character. He tells us that NightMare may have been insecure about his weakness due to parallel bosses being created from the character's most negative traits, and this version is always vulnerable. It also reaffirms that he is literally a nightmare. Also, we can infer that he only came into being after NightMare's defeat in Adventure, since his necklace has the broken crescent moon, which might confirm NightMare is still alive somewhere in the Kirby universe, or just that his thoughts live on. So since I said Kirby Right Back Atcha is canon, let me explain how and where it exists in universe. Kirby Right Back Atcha is not a retelling of Adventure like many people say it is. It is a prequel, the very first in the Kirby timeline, in fact, since we see Kirby arrive. Here, NightMare is at his absolute strongest. He has an entire space station and is immune to damage when he opens his cape. But after Kirby killed him in his dream, he became weaker. His station was completely obliterated and Dedede no longer has any reason to side with NightMare. So when he shows back up, just like how he said he would, Dedede seals him away since he is nothing but a threat and an annoyance now. When we battle him, his weak point is the inside of his cape, when before that was his invincible point. He only just came back to life after ages of dying, since multiple games happened in between the anime and the Kirby's Adventure. So it's not crazy to imagine he'd become weaker. An alternate explanation, as seen in Stereo Patrol EOS, where his weak point has nothing to do with the fact that his cape is open or not. Rather, it exposes itself when he's attacking. We never saw NightMare attack in Kirby Right Back At Ya until Kirby's Dream, which is where he wouldn't need to follow the rules anyway. Originally, I thought NightMare never coming back ever again was just due to the fact that they didn't want to overuse him, but he still canonically could. But an even better idea is, what if he stops coming back because Kirby no longer fears him? Kirby does show fear of seeing NightMare when he first emerges, but we rarely see Kirby panic when facing final bosses, unless the game feels like introducing a new mechanic. Alright, it's crackhead conspiracy time. The first most obvious thing to note is the crown he wears. Looks a little familiar, doesn't it? But even more so, it shares a resemblance to Galaxia. Which makes sense, as Meta Knight was created by NightMare, and NightMare creates monsters to guard and even attempts to steal Galaxia on multiple occasions. Of course, if you saw my Maglar video, you'd already know there's a high chance that Master Crown is created by the same ancient that made Galaxia, Photron. Now, not including him, who is some kind of sentient fire, who do you think is responsible for making the ancient artifacts? The humans. The Lore Starcutter was most likely created by the humans to escape Earth. Undeniably, it at least uses Elphilis's warp technology, and Maglar says it is made by the same people who made the Master Crown. An interesting choice of words, Kaboo refers to him as a man, instead of a demon or phantom or a more fitting word. NightMare is really one of the most human-looking characters in all Kirby, other than the fact that Hal can't seem to make up their minds whether he has floating hands like the majority of Kirby characters or actual human arms. They flip-flop constantly. But the human connection becomes near undeniable when you look at the enemy salesman. Don't get me wrong, I'm about to spoil the biggest plot twist in Kirby Right Back At Ya, so go watch the final episode if you don't know it already. But the enemy salesman actually has nub feet like a Waddle Dee or Kirby, so he's not actually a human. But the fact that NightMare creates a henchman that resembles a human on purpose is proof enough for this theory. This also gives more credit in the idea that DDD has worked with humans before in the past, because NightMare presumably uses this human appearance to appeal to DDD more. Or just to make him look more charming. But before we reach the point of no return, here's two smaller theory bits. Many people have noticed a visual similarity between NightMare and Darkmind. While they do look similar and behave similar, I didn't think they had much of a connection. That was until I saw this concept art of a NightMare gear set that was supposed to be in Super Kirby Clash, which looks decently similar to the Darkmind armor. In fact, the Darkmind armor even has a visor for some reason, despite the fact that Darkmind never had that, but NightMare does. This could imply an actual connection. Many people inaccurately call Darkmind the mirror world version of NightMare. In reality, he isn't the mirror world version of anything. It was said by Hal that Darkmind is no more than a manifestation of dark thoughts, and he can take different forms based on the perceiver. Because when Dark Meta Knight summons him, he became King D-Mind, because Taranza believed that DDD was the strongest in the universe. Since Parallel NightMare also summons him as King D-Mind, that probably means that NightMare has a bit of a vendetta against DDD still after their previous work and betrayals. So what does that say for Kirby perceiving him as NightMare? Probably that Kirby still fondly remembers NightMare as one of the first and biggest threats, or more likely, since Darkmind and NightMare are quite similar, with Darkmind being a manifestation of dark thoughts and NightMare being the manifestation of bad dreams, they naturally take a similar form. Due to Void existing in all forms, and Darkmind's true form sharing a dark matter motif, it's highly possible he is another form of Void, especially considering how much Void is influenced by the dark thoughts of others. But a character with a much more intriguing connection is Necrotius. We've already proven in a previous video that Necrotius once had flesh that was most likely purple going off of his nose. Necrotius was one of the original gods of the Kirby universe, so it would make sense if the appearance of him was etched into the general public's dark thoughts and nightmares. In Stereo Patrol EOS, NightMare even has Scullies as minions, while they don't appear in any of the other subgames. Now, with the reintroduction of Dream Matter in Forgotten Land, there's bound to be NightMare lore, and oh boy there is. So, Elphilis has dreams so powerful they can manifest an entire world based on his perception of reality. For example, Elphilis doesn't believe Clobberline actually cares about Leongar, so in Forgo Dreams she does not. So, with even the most minor characters getting some Elphilisified version, you'd think the humans that Elphilis hated the most would have some version here, right? Well, remember how Phantom Meta Knight was created from energy that was focused into controlling Meta Knight? That dream version of him was somehow powerful enough to escape Forgo dreams. Sure, it never made it into the real world per se, but it did make it into some limbo realm that had a portal that showed up in the real world. So, if something with only a little energy focused into it is strong enough to leave Forgo dreams, then the being Elphalus focuses all his hatred into would most certainly be powerful enough to escape. A being resembled a twisted human, who creates and dons artifacts for nothing but their own amusement and power, the owner of multiple megacorporations that spread across the entire universe powered by capitalism, a being that messes with and attempts to control mystical forces beyond their own comprehension, a being that tries to play God. Come on, it was clear from the start. There are three main possibilities here. 1. NightMare is an actual human using the Master Crown. 2. NightMare is the collective conscious of the universe and their fears for the ancients. 3. NightMare is Fecto Elphalus's personal nightmare created in the image of the humans that tortured him. Before that, is there any actual proof that the crown is supposed to be the Master Crown? Yes, there is in fact. Listen to this. This is NightMare's theme in Kirby Star Allies, and it inexplicably has a short snippet of Londia's theme at the beginning. If this isn't supposed to be tying to NightMare and the Master Crown together, then I genuinely have no clue why they did this. Him being an actual human with the Master Crown is the least likely to me, because looking at the NightMare mask in Return to Dreamland, it doesn't have the golden shine that all the other ancient artifacts have, which says to me that this is a phony, and also the fact that it was proven both in anime and in game that he is supposed to be an actual embodiment of nightmares. So if he was just a human, how would he end up this way? Theory 2 is the most likely answer. I mean, the ancients did create the Fountain of Dreams, which is where NightMare was said to first appear from. It makes sense that their own fears of themselves would emerge as their ambitions grew too far and out of control, and it would be really poetic that Kirby's first true villain ends up basically being a manifestation of modern Kirby lore. The Elphalus theory is my favorite because it puts a lot more character and meaning into both of these characters. However, it does have one important requirement that I find less likely, which is that the Master Crown was created before the humans escaped Earth. And while I do believe the humans were decently deranged since Elphalus, personally, I don't think they went off the deep end until they got to Halakandra. For one, because the resources necessary to create the Master Crown probably wasn't present on Earth. The only ability they siphoned out of Elphalus was warping, not godlike power. Perhaps the idea of the Master Crown was already in development, but the actual void power hasn't been infused with it yet. Oh yeah, let's just get this out of the way while we're at it. The Master Crown is most likely a form of void, is influenced by others similar to the way void is, and takes a similar form. Void Soul straight up appears in the background of the Master Crown fight, and one of the pause screens says, "This crown rules all." Void is the highest god in the Kirby universe as we know, so if anything rules all, it's Void. When Magolor is taken over by the Master Crown, he even does a similar thing to Popstar or that Elphalus does. If not supposed to be the Master Crown, other possibilities are the crown is just because Elphalus viewed them as super egotistical and it means nothing beyond that, or it's some kind of fate thing. Then there's the wizard aspect. Since the humans were living in a modern society by the time of Elphalus, it might be a little odd for Elphalus to imagine the humans as a medieval wizard type. However, considering they are experiencing with what is essentially magic, it's not too impossible to imagine. Heck, maybe the scientists weren't able to figure out Elphalus, and they enlisted the help of previously shunned members of society that dabbled in the occult. Since Void is the true god of the Kirby universe, it wouldn't be insane to imagine there was a religion or cult dedicated to Void on Earth, too. Then there's always Theory 4, that he's Void. I'm against this theory because, as we discussed in my last Kirby lore video, Elphalus is Void. So we already know what Dream Matter Void looks like. And while Elphalus doesn't particularly look similar to Void, Void usually has more animal and beast type forms. NightMare just looks like an ugly human, and has a higher intelligence than all the other nil life. Not very Void-like. It is the only one we've heard speaking before. However, Kirby is Void, and Hal said if you cut open Kirby, what you'd find inside is dreams. And we've seen a small glimpse into Kirby before, and each time it looks like a blue starry night sky, which is NightMare's design motif. And the Kirby stomach graphic in Squeak Squad even looks remarkably similar to NightMare's power orb, so we can't rule it out. Also, NightMare creates life, just like Void does, being God. These are the only two beings we've seen to just create life like this. And Magolor, but he likely inherited that power from the Void. One last thing is when Susie steals Stardream, she says some startup company will pay top dollar for this. I know NightMare Enterprises has been destroyed by this point, but just the thought that another company out there would just buy a universe-destroying machine like this means whoever manifested NightMare into NightMare Enterprises being a thing probably wasn't very exaggerated. To summarize, NightMare is the fear of the ancient humans, their artifacts, and their power manifested. Likely also fueled by fear of Necrotius, and likely conjured by Fecto Elphalus. Dark Mind is a similarly manifestation of dark thoughts, now possibly being the thoughts of the ancients in power. The Master Crown is also most likely Void. This theory honestly isn't as insane as I initially thought. Once I realized the thematic importance it had in the grand scheme of Kirby lore, it just felt right. Of my crackhead conspiracy, I've got 2 entire playlists dedicated to similar theories, and I've got many more coming in the future, so stay tuned.